I think we'll dive in. So just like to say hello to everybody. My name's Christy. I work with Sustainable Table as the Industry Development Manager. Just before we dive in, I'm going to run through a few quick house rules for today's webinar. Just that everyone has the right to be valued and cared for and respected in this space. We've got lots of different parts of the agricultural community coming together to have really real conversations and sometimes hard conversations today. And noting that there can sometimes be emotive issues, and we just like to ask people are respectful, and that there's also a lot of people on this call, which is fantastic. So we just need to leave space to hear different voices today. The meeting is being recorded to be sent out publicly, so just wanted to let everybody know that. And if you could please keep your questions towards the end, we will have about 20 minutes of Q&A for everyone to have a dialogue later on. We'll be going for about 2 hours today. If people want to share anything on the comments, they're welcome to, any articles or information or things that they think of as we're going through these conversations. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the country that I'm coming from today is Yorta Yorta country. And it was really beautiful. Today I woke up and looked out the window and saw a noisy miner at the very beginnings of making a little nest, tiny little twigs and cobwebs. And yeah, it was just for me a reminder of spring. Spring's coming, the seasons are turning. And it also made me think of, I wonder what the calendar is for the Yorta Yorta people. So that's something I think I'd like to try and find out before I head off this afternoon. So yeah, I'd just really like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the First Nations peoples, elders, past, present, and future emerging leaders today from all the countries that we're coming from. And the phrase, nothing about us without us, for me resonates deeply as we reflect on the structure of our agricultural systems. It's not enough to invite First Nations voices into the conversation. We must acknowledge that they were always here, and the true regeneration requires returning decision-making power to these peoples. Sovereignty has never been ceded, and we can't regenerate land without acknowledging its history and working to cease the perpetuation of colonisation. So as part of this, Sustainable Table now has a reconciliation action plan, and these action plans have been developed to enable organisations to sustainably and strategically take meaningful action towards advancing reconciliation. So if you want to know more about the RAP, we'll pop some links in the chat about that. So today we're very lucky to have Mindy, Bruce, Josh and Josh. Thanks so much for coming along. And I'm going to hand over to Josh to do some introductions and to facilitate this panel moving forward. So thanks so much, everybody, and look forward to a great conversation. Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. I think I'm probably going to be most of the tech challenges today. So, Chrissy, you've done a great job in getting through the first bit without a tech glitch, but, bear with us if there's any tech glitches. So I'm Joshua Staines. I'm a Wiradjuri man. My family originally come from out west, so Molong, Parks, Leeton here in New South Wales. I'm up on Darkinjung country today, up on the Central Coast, dialing in with very sketchy internet. So please be kind. I think, thank you, Christy, as well, for doing the acknowledgement of country. If other people dialing in, if you'd like to acknowledge what country you're dialing in from as well, that would be great. It's good to see who's listening and where you're joining from, and what working together and journeying together in the country that you're calling home might look like into the future. Acknowledging country is acknowledging the First Nations ways of knowing, being, and doing with country. So the only way we get to learn that is by sitting in spaces where we get to hear from one another, learn from our knowledge holders and elders. And it's not all too different from the broader agricultural community, first, second, third, fourth generation farmers that have been, in those parts of the world for some time now. There's a great love and appreciation that comes with working with the land and working with country. And, today we're not just going to be talking exclusively about bush foods and the native species that were here prior to colonization, but also the commodities and ways in which First Nations people are working more broadly across the agricultural space. So, that being said, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And seeing that Uncle Bruce, you're off mute, you're ready to go, firing and ready to go. I might ask Uncle Bruce to give us a bit of background about who you are, where you're from, and what country you're dialing in from today.
Hello, everyone. My name's Bruce Pascoe. I'm from Yuin Bunurong, Tasmanian heritage. I'm coming in from the very southern end of Yuin country. My mother's family were born on the very north of Yuin country, where I slept the other night, and I'm on the sunny south of that country today, and looking forward to talking with you about our country.
Awesome. Thank you, Uncle Bruce. Mindy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, Yahweh, Jingila Jingiwala Yumava, Nanyari Mindi, Ni Banjalan Dubai, Wijabuwai, Wunai, and then Nagali Najagun, Nagali Garma Mala Jagun. Hello, you mob. My name's Mindy. I'm a proud Bunjalung woman. I have ties to Widjabul and Nibal countries on Bunjalung. So deadly to be here. It's Gaga Balingu season up on Bunjalung now. We're heading into our pre-spring season. The sun is shining and beautiful to be able to celebrate country, community, and culture with you mob today. Yahweh Bugube.
Thank you, Mindy. And Josh Gilbert.
Thanks, Braz. Good everyone. I'm Josh Gilbert. I'm a Wormi man. I live and work on country here on Wormi country, which is home for me. I'm a Bug Derby descendant. We've got a pretty big family, about 500 of us, I think, if you got us all together. So a big mob. Was born here on country, maybe about 300 meters, 400 meters that way, actually, and returned here a few years ago to be connected back to this place. And yeah, very much looking forward to our yarn today.
Awesome. While I've got you, Josh, don't mute yourself just yet. A lot of people dialing in today probably might have never been to Warramai country. Can you share a little bit about your country? Maybe it was a walk out on country recently, or maybe an observation from feeding the horses this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're dialing in from?
Yeah, Ken, thanks. And I think important to share with you all what I'm sharing with you my truths, what's true to me, and what are the yarns that I hold dear, and the other mob and even some members of my extended family have other truths that flow through their conversation. So these are what are handed to me, and what I'm sharing is what is true to me, and I acknowledge that the truth is a bit of a nebulous conversation, and particularly based in agriculture. Uh, so more of my country for me goes from almost Newcastle in the south, kind of the Raymond Terrace area, and we know the swamplands down around Hexham was an important place for us, a wedding marriage site actually, where our people would come together and celebrate coming together. And it kind of comes all the way up the coast, up to Foster Tuncurry and out to the Barrington Tops. Where I live is a place called Gloucester, named Gloucester because the agricultural company that got given our land reflected on this place and thought it looked like home, actually, and looked out to the mountain ranges and thought that they were castles falling down, and reflected that that was a good time to think of where they came from and called this place Gloucester, and a little town just south of us called Stratford. So you get these very English names for where I live. I guess th this place for me is super important. It doesn't matter where I am or where I'm at country, it's always beautiful. The buck and buckets, which are just outside this window, for me is a constant reminder of our men's sights and strength and celebration of country here. And then certainly if I kind of look around, we've got some important women's places here as well. And where our school is actually kind of controversially and strangely enough is a place where we would come together and celebrate culture. So this place is very much home for me, where I find peace and comfort and I guess have a real joy of being able to work and live and have that connection every day.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Mindy, I might flick back to you because you were noting it's a bit of a change in the season up in your part of the world. So can you tell us a little bit about your part of the world and what's happening out on country?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Hands up if any of you mob have been lucky to be up on Bundjalung country. So Bundjalung, yeah, deadly mob. Bundjalung, I mean, it's famous for Byron Bay. We call it cabin bar, meeting place, but Byron goes right up to the Logan River in the north. Our southern boundary is the Lower Clarence River down near Iluka. We go right out west to the McPherson's Ranges, and then we've got that big, deadly coastline up and down the Australian East Coast. We are first light people, it's first light in the morning, first rays of sunlight hit our beautiful country in the morning. And I'm a Yebi Dube. So a Yebi Gube Dube, which is a saltwater woman. My ancestors, on my lineage goes back through my mum's line, and they've been here for a long, long time. And such a privilege to be on Bundjalung right now. We've got 6 seasons in our calendar. A lot of people don't realize, a lot of us mob have deadly seasons that aren't winter, spring, autumn, winter. We were here long before that kind of came across, but it's Gaga Balingu, as I said, goanna season. So it's kind of pre-spring for us. We've got these big northerly winds coming in, but we've got longer days and shorter nights. Nights are still cool, but we've got to, watch out because all those gubbles, those carpet pythons are starting to reappear and end up in all sorts of places. I had one in my laundry the other day. So keeping an eye out for our beautiful carpet pythons. Our goannas are coming out of hibernation. And of course, we get a lot of jellyfish on our beach at this time, but bushfire season will start up soon. We've got all the flowering of the heath and a beautiful way to connect to country, just to observe and be present and have Ghana respect and understanding for what country does around us.
Thanks so much, Mindy, for sharing. Just reflecting on what's happening down in Durrett country at the moment as well. We've got the eels that are migrating, the dolphins are eating cuttlefish, and there's snapper in the bay cleaning up the rest of that. And yeah, it coincides with some really interesting goanna and turtle behavior too. So thanks for sharing. Bruce, down your way, what's happening on country for you?
Well, very, very cool mornings, but beautiful days. And the brim coming up the rivers, the salt rivers here now. And it's always an exciting time when we see those fish come past the farm. And 2 days ago, the Jackie Winter sang a song which it only sings at this time of the year and only sings it for about 3 days. And it's probably a cheeky song calling out to female birds, or it may be the female bird calling out to the fellas, but you only hear that for a few days and then it's gone and they're on to other business. And those changes are really important. The wedge-tailed eagles, Bunjil, not very prominent now, but will be in a few weeks' time because there'll be a young Bunjil up on the ridge that I'm looking at in the next few weeks, and that means that not just spring happening, but hot weather too. So, we love these rivers and we love the hills and feel very comfortable here, like Josh Gilbert said just a moment ago. And knowing your country means you're never lonely.
Yeah. Thank you. And for anyone dialing in, if there's things that are happening in your part of the world on your farm that you're looking after, please feel free to drop that in as well. Yeah, there's a lot happening. We're wrapping up a cultural fire season down in Sydney at the moment too, finishing up with some stringy bark trees. So yeah, there's a lot happening for everyone across the country. So thank you all for sharing. Might go back to Josh Gilbert, noting country, and I guess our ways of knowing, being, and doing with country. Since colonization, it's definitely changed. There's definitely been some challenges. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges happening up in your part of the world and Warramai country? What's unfolding, what's changing? What are the challenges?
Yeah, happy to. And I guess one of the opportunities, right? Which for me is always a good way of kind of challenging my thinking as well, and almost the way in which we look at this place. So I guess for background, our country was colonized 200 years ago last year. It was gifted to the Australian Agricultural Company, the biggest agricultural company of the time, and still one of the biggest agricultural companies still in Australia today. And the reason why they got that is that they were back 200 years ago, which is pretty fascinating actually. They were able to somehow raise 1 million pounds back in that 200-year time period, which gifted them, the Australian government at that time gifted them 1 million pounds in response, 1 million acres in response to the 1 million pounds. Um, so they got gifted this country, and I guess the process of colonization was very much agriculturally driven. This land was taken over, actually used for sheep back then, and a kind of a hotbed for other agricultural commodities. They've tried growing wheat here. This is very much not wheat country if you here on the coast. They tried growing sugarcane, and when the sheep were really struggling because of the humidity, they started bringing cattle up instead. So I'm often thinking about this landscape as what is that connection, and how do we still kind of keep that connection in a place where agriculture colonized this landscape most and hardest. That agricultural company still lives on, and has a very poor relationship with our people. And how do we actually tell the stories from this country to help inform our agricultural narrative going forward? So I guess part of my role is to think about how we show that connection. How do we build the conversations, realizing that there's a bit of toing and froing around that relationship, but really, I guess, keeping land at the center of everything we do. That this country has been here for forever, despite having these 200 years of white agricultural narrations here on this country. We also have kind of narrations from our own mob over that period of time that still talk about its beauty and the way in which country feels and resonates to us. And really, I guess, thinking about how we revive some of the practices as well. So our family is going through a process at the moment of reviving some of our connections to country based on some of those historic documents that we've been able to find through the AACO archives. And really, I guess, think a lot more broadly around what the opportunities might exist for our children and children's children going forward.
And us joining in on the call, getting to come and visit at some stage,
God.
Yeah. Bruce, is what Josh has picked up, is that resonating with your region too, in terms of some of the ways it's changed and changing?
Yeah, this country was stolen relatively recently because it's so remote and mostly forested. So it was only the valleys that were useful agriculturally in Western terms. But the thing about those valleys was that they were already cleared. People were already growing stuff in those valleys. I spoke to a very old lady at Bombala, old white lady, and she came into this country with her husband, or sorry, she married the son of a man who came into this country. And when he arrived, he didn't have to do any work apart from put up fences because the land was already open, because people were growing murnong there, murnong and lilies, which are the two main products that we grow on this farm. And as a result of those indigenous crops, he was very successful. But that particular man was involved in the clearances of Aboriginal people. I'm not allowed to say the M word about what happened to those people because I was asked by Uncle Max Harrison not to use that word, but to talk about it in other ways. I struggle with that at times because I think sometimes the colony doesn't appreciate its own crime. But the people were eliminated from this country reasonably late. And so the farm that I'm on, I can remember the first fences going up here in 1970. And so it's a relatively recent farm. So when we dig into the soil here, we can see the fine aggregations of carbon that the old people put down as cultural burns. It's only in the top few centimetres of the soil here where large chunks of carbon occur, and those large chunks are talking to us about wildfire, which we had again in 2019. But we bought this farm because it was the cheapest farm in Gippsland because it's so remote. But we're lucky that we did in many ways because we've got both saltwater and freshwater, river flat and hill. So it allows us to have a range of foods here that were already here when we arrived, but we've just been able to encourage those and try and suppress the exotics. The people who work here are living on Yuin country, but some of them come from other Aboriginal countries. And at the moment, we're being managed by Twofold Aboriginal Corporation, which is the local Aboriginal mob. And I'm hoping that in years to come, when our forestry program here is well developed and we've planted out our tubers and our grasses, that Aboriginal people can make a living off this place. We're doing that now, but with limited numbers of people. And I'm hoping, and this is the vision of Twofold as well, is that we can create employment programs so that our people can become more financially secure while maintaining cultural contact with the land. And having the farm on this river, which flows into two other rivers, gives us that cultural contact. I'll just introduce you to my dog.
Yes,
Hey, Gilbert,
please.
come up here. Come up here. Now this fella, come up. Can you see his big head?
Yes.
He's got the biggest in Gippsland, haven't you? He's very sleepy now. When I talk, he always goes to sleep. But his name is Ginor George. And Ginor George is one of the people who's buried underneath the Genoa Bridge, the Ginor Bridge. They've italicized the word Ginor, which in our language means foot. They've italicized it to the Italian town Genoa, and that's sort of indicative of the attitude that was taken to the Aboriginal people. But that river, Ginor, comes from the foot of Nullangool, Mount Kosciuszko. The river that flows past the farm comes from the other side of Nullangool. So these two rivers that come down here and join at the farm embrace a great slab of the Australian Alps, and which is Ngunnawal and Ngarigo country, and other people, you know, also have obligations to that country. You know, I don't talk about ownership, I talk about obligations. And so in introducing that poor old dog, what I'm saying is that we try to maintain that cultural contact. And in our terms, he's my nephew. He's not a dog. And it's his great uncle that is buried under that bridge with no plaque, no sign, no thought, but we know he's there. And we hope that in time this town can be unionised back to Ginor, and that man be remembered. It's not the people that are so important, but the country itself. But those people were looking after it. In fact, Ginor Jack was one of those other fellas. He taught Europeans in the Wongrabel Valley how to culturally burn. And he did that because he was so concerned that they were letting the country go rough. He wanted them to keep the country open, he said, because otherwise it'll burn you. And he was telling that to a man who had actually killed most of his family. That is how much he loved his country, that he would tell the murderer how to look after country too, because most of his people were gone.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the devotion of that man to country. And so when young people come out here, I tell them that story and say, you know, if he could do that, what are you going to do? How are you going to maintain your country? How are you going to love your country? You know, we make bread from the flour that we harvest here, the tubers we sell online, you know, we make jams and syrups and that. All of these things are profitable, but at the very root of it all is country. And that's who we're looking after. If she gives us, you know, a Davidson plum syrup for ice cream and curries and whatever, well and good. But she can't give us that without us understanding who she is, and loving her for herself.
Yeah.
Not for what she gives us, but just loving her for herself. And if we're able to live here as well, that's good. But we have to make sure that our first priority is her.
Yeah. I think you touched on some really great points, Uncle Bruce, particularly the truth telling that's needed within agriculture. You know, when we're talking about reconciliation or conciliation coming together as a country and bringing different pockets of our community and broader agricultural sector together, we need that truth telling that acknowledges that you know, the agricultural production and industries that have come out into different parts of the country, it wasn't a smooth transition by any means. And I think like there's a lot of beauty in what you've said, that in spite of those points of friction and challenging parts of our history where there's been that devastation from mob and from our knowledge holders, there has always been that hand extended back out saying that we'll walk with you. And you know, we need to put this country first. So I think there's a lot in that. And I might flick to Mindy as well. So Mindy, there's probably a lot that Uncle Bruce and Josh have touched on that resonates with you, and probably another layer here is around the economic development and investment that has gone into places like Byron Bay. And has that enabled truth telling? Has that enabled, you know, education programs or employment programs for mob in your community? So yeah, over to you, Mindy. Wherever you want to take it, wherever you want to take it.
No way. Big questions, brother. I mean, it's a journey, isn't it? I think truth telling takes time, truth telling needs to be digested. I mean, as much as our mob have been trying to tell truth for a really long time, we're only slowly getting to the point where, the wider audience is being able to palate, and digest some of our truths. And for us, our truths can't be interpreted. Bits of them can't be taken without the whole. Our community is about being holistic, in our truth telling. And I think our perspectives have been kept out of it for a really long time. I'm proudly Bundjalung. I'm also proudly mixed heritage. So, I look at things from different perspectives, from my mother's line, a Bundjalung woman, to my father's line, a beautiful white fella that, is incredibly compassionate and wants to see change for our community and, importantly, our future. I always lean back on the knowledge and the wisdom of my elders, in these situations. I'm really fortunate. Bundjalung's matriarchal, hey? So as a Bundjalung woman, there is an expectation that women are leaders within our community. It is women's business to be involved in food, and we are doing a lot of work at the moment to try and reclaim that as part of our cultural birthright, that we should be walking this space. We should be leading an industry that I believe has very much been taken away from our people. When we look at the native food industry at the moment, I'm incredibly passionate about it, but the truth of the native food industry is that it has been taken out of our hands. It is based on our intellectual, cultural IP, and communities are benefiting out of those, and it is not mob. That is, we've got less than 2% representation in an industry that's growing at speed. It's about an $80 million industry at the moment, projected to be worth $250 million by the end of this year. And we got less than 2% representation in that entire supply chain, from growers to producers to food manufacturers. And of course, we've got issues of things like black cladding of our products. People very freely embrace native foods. They're very trendy at the moment, but they go beyond trend for us. They are connected to country, culture, and community. And that connection is inseparable. And without recognizing and celebrating that connection, and then benefit sharing within this industry, it will never achieve what it's truly out there to do. We all talk about reconciliation action plans and these kind of things, but what are we putting into action? I say, forget that document that sits away in that filing cabinet. Walk with us on country, grow with us, listen and learn from our people. That's where the future of agriculture for me really needs to go. We talk about things like sustainable farming, permaculture, regenerative farming, how people have been doing that for a really long time. We talk about food security. Come on, get on board, you mob. We don't even have a native food strategy, in our nation. Our policymakers haven't done that yet. So what are we doing in that regard? That needs to be First Nations led. We've got a situation where our natural resources, our beautiful native food, is being taken and grown offshore. Gulalang, our beautiful finger lime that's endemic to Bundjalung country, it's grown more in the US, in Guatemala, and in Europe than it is in our own nation. That's massive shame on Australia for letting that go and for encouraging industry growth offshore. That is a natural resource that belongs to our country, and the benefits of that should be going back to our mob. We think and that is just one example. I'm really passionate about Gulalang, our beautiful finger lime, because of course it's been revered and celebrated by chefs internationally, but its cultural roots are back with my people on Bundjalung. It comes from the big scrub, the most biodiverse country on the planet. We've only got 1% left of our big scrub, hey? So I'm doing a lot of work with our beautiful local growers, farmers at the moment to try and help them reimagine how they're doing agriculture, to reimagine what the future looks like, embracing our First Nations knowledges and walking beside our mob to reframe what agriculture looks like. Desperately, our people need access to land. They wonder why we don't have a foot in the door when it comes to our native food industry. Our land was taken from us. Let's be honest. My aunties were walked off their properties when they were little girls and shut off the places that they were born. This is within our lifetimes. That's the reality of this stuff. We need access to land. We deserve a seat at the table. We're 3% of the population. We're not a threat. We are not a threat to anyone. What we bring is value. When we look at places like Europe, they have appellation systems. Italy has the DOP. France has the appellation system. Why do we not have that for our beautiful native foods in this country? Provenance is so important. Place and connection. We can demonstrate that we've had a continuous cultural connection to these foods for millennia, and that connection continues. And an industry, like, as I mentioned, is based on our cultural IP. Where are the benefits coming back to our mob and our community? I don't see, our grocery stores having a native food section in them. We think of all the beautiful multicultural foods that we've embraced and revered as our own in this nation, but where are our first people represented? Where are our first foods in there? I love the fact that we're multicultural. It makes us one of the most culturally rich and strong nations on the planet, but our first people and our first foods have been left behind. On Bundjalung, of course, we've turned into this incredible agricultural region because we are a prolific, biodiverse native food bowl. One of the biggest native food bowls on the entire continent is right here on Bundjalung. But our foods have been overlooked and dismissed, considered unpalatable, undesirable, except for in the international audience. We've got a long way to go. We're uneducated when it comes to the true history of our food culture, because not only are we the oldest, continuous living civilization on the planet, we're the oldest food culture in the world. That is something that we should all be so proud of. We were baking bread well before the Egyptians were building those pyramids. We've got the oldest forms of sustainable aquaculture anywhere on the planet right here in this country. This should all be something, this is a knowledge that we should all be so proud of. It should be revered and celebrated as a combined and shared heritage. But our people should be at the forefront of that. We should be leading that. And the future of agriculture is in our hands. We shouldn't have to ask or for an invitation to be part of these conversations. We should be welcomed with open arms, eh? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think you're preaching to the converted. I think, the natural question is, what does that leadership and journey look like? We've seen across the agricultural sector, different emerging industries and levied industries, research development corporations. So what does that look like for you, Mindy?
It's pretty straightforward for me, and it makes a lot of common sense. When you look at the leadership of our mob and what our values are based on, the principles of First Nations leadership, it's having a holistic vision, making sure that that interconnected web, physical, emotional, spiritual, mental well-being are all connected to country. They're inseparable. Making sure we've got community-centered approaches. Decisions are made for the collective good, not just for the individual. That's a big problem for us at the moment. Intergenerational wisdom, learning from our elders, revering that wisdom so we can look after future generations and strengthen them, for the future. Resilience, adapting with strength and adaptability, being resilient. And we all know that we need climate resilience at the moment, but we need to do that together, going from a point of view of that we're stewards, we're custodians of the land. We need to look after country so she can continue to look after us and the next generations, bringing those values and principles into agriculture, working with mob. This is not about one or the other. It is about us walking forward. So working with allied businesses, allowing First Nations access to land so they can share their wisdoms with you. I'm a Bundjalung woman. I'm a protector of the water and a custodian of the land. I'm a knowledge holder, a seed, carrier. I'm a fire keeper. All of those things are relevant, more relevant than ever before for the management of country. We need to start realizing that they have a place more than ever. We need to start integrating these wisdoms and practices into modern day agriculture. So benefit.
And Bruce, you've got your hand up too. Do you want to jump in and tack in?
Thanks, Josh. I'm really glad Mindy Woods is my sister. It's that voice and that energy is incredibly valuable, and incredibly encouraging at times when encouragement is hard to find. I think what Aboriginal food producers and providers need is a representative body. We've been talking about it for decades, but when non-Aboriginal organisations engage with it, they think in colonial terms. They think they're going to be running it. I've been having a conversation with the Department of Agriculture for 3 years, which began with them saying they were going to establish an organisation which would be run by them and which would also invite non-Aboriginal people into the industry. I don't think that invitation is required. What we need is a majority Aboriginal board and only Aboriginal members to direct how Aboriginal food sovereignty and food labelling and identification happens. And, people think that we're being uncooperative or heavy-handed in that, but, that 2% of money coming out of bushfoods going to Aboriginal people is an absolute disgrace, but it's actually 1.8%. And I always say 1.8% because I want to highlight the impoverished thought processes that go behind it. And, the people in the Department of Ag I'm working with are not bad people. They did not attack camp sovereignty at the weekend. They're not that kind of people, but they're blood ignorant. They're ignorant of their own history and they're supercilious about how they can fix the problem. We don't want them to fix the problem because we can fix the problem. The problem is them. And so we need a representative body to talk on our behalf to government, talk on our behalf to the consumers, and talk on our behalf to the United Nations. Because this mob down here at, say, Jigamy are so busy looking after the old people, making sure that babies reach their desired birth weight, looking after the country, looking after the Bundian way, looking after trying to get our young people into the fishing industry, that they can't be going to Canberra every second week to make a representation to the Department of Agriculture. I'm absolutely sick of it. I want an Aboriginal body to be doing that on our behalf. And I reckon I get an email a week from somebody who thinks it's a great idea. And inevitably that person is white. And inevitably that person has in their mind an expert panel made up of farmers and bureaucrats to do this work. We've got enough people on this panel to do that work, to find those people. And, we've got people in our community like Josh, like the two Joshes, who can do these tasks, but they're going to have to be remunerated, and non-Aboriginal people just have to stand clear, not stand in front of the desk and direct the show, but just stand clear, because Aboriginal people can do it if we're allowed. And that allowance means making sure that we're resourced to do that job. The Department of Agriculture have an obligation to correct that 2% number, that 1.8% number, and they can do it by setting up this Aboriginal body and making sure it's resourced.
Thank you. I definitely agree with Josh G. Not so much myself. I'm on the cards to do school pickup this afternoon, so I definitely can't be going to Canberra. But on that note, I will flick to Josh G to talk a bit more about this. I know, Josh, you've actually written a paper about this recently.
He's written a book.
A book as well.
And but yeah, all things. Yeah, I mean, I think just echoing everything else that's been said, really, the fallacy that mob can't lead our own direction in these conversations is a fallacy, and we need to embody and empower and provide the opportunity for mob. And that needs to come in all ways to come and lead these conversations. We need to move to a space where when we talk about diversity in agriculture, we don't just talk about what we grow, but the people who are around the table and the yarns that are being had, and really ensure that mob are leading those conversations from our perspective. One of the things I keep kind of challenging agriculture by is we keep hearing these stats about, farmers looking after 40% of the country. I'm like, that's great. Even by your own legal system standards, mob have legal interests in over more land than what we use for agricultural commodities here. So why don't we just have a Department of Indigenous Lands or the Indigenous Estate that's funded the same as agriculture, and we can do our own work to help empower mob to go off and farm. I guess for me the challenge is that we need these conversations sooner rather than later. By putting them off, we continue to kind of, the inevitable will happen. We need to have those yarns, and we need to make sure that they're done in a really appropriate manner with mob and with elders who understand those yarns and who can share the truths around what happened with agriculture, and do that in a way that's really encouraging for us to continue our involvement. Often, I think to Uncle Bruce's point, this idea of how we lead in a space that actively was involved in the massacres of our people, for me is a really challenging thing. And I know personally I get this agitation at times where you just are so annoyed by how little progress we've made, but then in reflection, some of the empowering things that we have been able to do is at least ask for a seat at the table. I mean, we often don't always get it, but at least we're in a position now to be treated like human beings, to have those conversations, which for me is a step, but it goes nowhere near far enough. Here, I guess on country, I wonder, what does our relationship look like with the biggest agricultural company on earth, who is known and who is documented, despite some of their recent claims, to have massacred our people. There's two massacre sites within 50 kilometers of where I am now that their members were known to have conducted. And for me, I think, how do we embrace those conversations with love, with truth telling, with open arms, and saying that actually we need to have these yarns despite how much they might hurt and how much they might challenge us. How do we actually lead in a space where that ability just to have those conversations can at least start something? And I think we've got mob right across this country doing that. We just need to really acknowledge that work. I think to Uncle Bruce's point, we do need a national body that at least advocates for our interests. We can't trust the existing agricultural organizations to do that. They're very non-representative of Indigenous interests, and there's plenty of examples of that. And I think for me, to Mindy's point as well around how you create action in terms of reconciliation action. These organizations have started, that the research and development corporations, for instance, have started these conversations around reconciliation, but their work goes nowhere near to where it should. And if they all just kind of chipped in their fair share, their 3% of procurement that they're one day going to have to meet the guidance of, actually that gives us about, it's over $50 million for us to manage our own affairs. And that could be a good potential source of us being able to use our own self-determining methods and resources to go off and do the advocacy work and also the research work that we so desperately need.
But just touching on a few things that you tucked in there towards the end, Josh. So one is research development corporations. Probably most people joining do know what they are and what their role, purpose, function is, how they've been established, and the support that they get from layers of government or had in previous years. Could you expand a little bit more on that? And talk about, you mentioned 3%. So talking about the Indigenous procurement policy and looking at some of the procurement targets that they're exploring. Can you, what are RDCs, their role, purpose, function, how do they come about? And also a bit more about that procurement side that would enable mob to exercise self-determination.
Yeah, so we have a range of research and development corporations in Australia. There's about 13, I think, from memory, each representing an industry group. So for instance, that for the beef cattle or red meat industry, there is the Meat and Livestock Australia. Their job is to advance the research and also the awareness around the commodities, and their members to do the work on the ground. So there's ones for the grain industry, there's one for red meat, there's one for the wool industry, etc., etc. All these large commodities take a piece of the pie whenever you sell a commodity. So for every time you sell a beef cow, for instance, you pay $5.50 to Meat and Livestock Australia. And in addition, the federal government matches that $5.50 dollar for dollar. So they actually come out with $11 for every cow that's kind of sold. We know we have mob out there who are producing these kind of bigger commodities as well. Often they're not involved in the conversations due to racism predominantly, but also in terms of kind of the fear of identifying and the way in which that could be done. And to be honest, there's been no need or reason for these Aboriginal organisations and people to identify throughout that process to date. In fact, you're probably going to get a lot of flack for it if you do. So our mob have been paying these fees for a long period of time. And I know that the kind of big conversation will be that maybe there's not scale in terms of that. But just to give you reference, the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation, which is a government-owned organisation as well, at one stage was the 5th biggest cattle producer in Australia. That means that they were the 5th biggest levy payer to Meat and Livestock Australia. And yet there has been practically none. The odd, and by the odd I mean like probably less than 5 Indigenous research projects being done by these organizations. So instead of, and to give you a sense as to how much money these make collectively, it's about $2.26 billion that these RDCs get in terms of the federal government allocation and also how much they get from their members. All of these organizations are going through a process of working out what does a reconciliation action plan look like, or what might that process kind of start with. There's been 2 of these RDCs that have done that. The GRDC, the Grains Research and Development Corporation, have got one out in public, and Meat and Livestock Australia have committed to one as well. The kind of result of a RAP, they're not perfect kind of documents in any sense, but kind of I lead you down the path as to where they try and aspire to in terms of employment and procurement. They say that the organizations should spend as much money as what is representative by the Indigenous population, and should also recruit enough Indigenous people with the same population slant as well. And in Australia, that's about 3.8% of our population. So around 3.8% of our current population identify as Indigenous, and therefore that's where these organizations should be spending, how much money they should be spending and how many people they should be recruiting. The kind of issues are that we don't have enough Indigenous people involved in the agricultural industry to meet that 3% criteria. We're already currently behind, and the Indigenous people that we do get in the door leave very quickly. So the age of Indigenous people involved in the agricultural sector is almost 10 years younger than the non-Indigenous sector, non-Indigenous people in agriculture. So we don't get the people through the door. We're not growing them up and providing that supportive career guidance for them. And also that there's probably not the ease of these organizations overnight developing the cultural capability and capacity to go off and spend about 4% of their budgets with Indigenous businesses. So from a very kind of granular level, I guess I'd say, why would we wait for these organizations to go off and do all this work when they could just take 3% of their budgets and redirect into something that we can have as terms of Indigenous people, that we can self-direct and have self-funded, and we can make the decisions around where that money is spent. And that gives you about over $50 million a year for us to make those decisions. And that could be research, it could be advocating for Indigenous people's interest in agriculture, and at least having this representative body that we know we need. So that's kind of the opportunity. The kind of fascinating piece of data for me that's come out recently is that the Indigenous population is set to grow very heavily in the next 20 years. So we could have actually the Indigenous population representing 8% of Australia's population in the next 20 years. 1 in 15 people will be blackfellas, and that for me is very exciting, but really kind of makes a very interesting case as to what does procurement and what does representation within workforces look like when we can't meet the 3% that's already there. And I guess it really speaks to why we need to be doing this work now and what the opportunities are. So I guess from a really high level perspective is if we can get each of the RDCs to get the bare minimum 3% of their levies being redirected to an Indigenous Research and Development Corporation and advocacy group, and that gets matched dollar for dollar by federal government like it currently gets matched, we actually at least have some resources to go off and do the work that we need and can provide that self-determining structure to go and do that work. And I've noticed Josh isn't here. He might have. Oh, here he is. He's back.
It's a good trick, wasn't it? Oh, good. My it's the second time it's done it. I was very proactive this morning and joined early, and it did it shortly after as well. So sincerest apologies. Josh, and I'm sure you nailed the key messages towards tech difficulties. You also touched on, I guess, like the Indigenous land being a significant participant in the beef and cattle industry, at one stage being the 5th biggest supplier. It's probably really important to note that it's not just people work 500 varieties of native bush foods, but we have mob in the grain industry, we have mob managing cattle in fisheries in different places, and working in a whole range of ways. Bruce and Mindy, do you guys want to talk about meaningful attraction, retention, and progression strategies? Bruce, maybe you want to go first, because I know that you've had, we've had a lot of experience at Black Duck Foods in terms of bringing in people from all different walks of life, and trying to do that strategic investment in building people up to not just work with native bush foods, but working in landscape management, from using cultural fire to using machinery from harvesters and Kim seed machines and all that sort of stuff. It's not a quick and easy process, is it? It's something that takes quite a while. Fair bit of investment, fair bit of time.
And one of the things that happens in the Aboriginal community is that when people demonstrate their ability, they're quite often snapped up by government, and they exit our industry. That's happened to us a number of times. We've done all the training for those people, and they've gone on to organisations that can pay them better. And that's what the farm is all about, is actually improving people's financial security so that their kids never think twice about buying a new school book, or they never think twice about going to university because they don't have the money to support it. So we need to change that culture. We need to build that culture, and employment and training. But it's too late when people are 16, 17, 18. We need to be talking to young Aboriginal kids when they're 7, 8, and 9, and making sure that they're thinking about a life on the land where they can work culturally at the same time. They don't have to do anything about it when they're 10 and 11, except stay at school. But by the time they're 13 and 14, when they are beginning to think about the end of their schooling, they've had that period of 5 or 6 years to consider the farming industry. What Australia can do in its reconciliation plan is to make sure that courses are available for those kids and make sure that they're well prepared, that during their school life, they've got all the support they need. You know, one of my friends has a disadvantaged child, non-Aboriginal people, and that disadvantaged child gets an enormous amount of support in school. Aboriginal kids are disadvantaged in another way by having been ignored for 230 years and vilified for 230 years. So our kids need support at school at a very early age to be reassured that Australia does not hate them, that Australia is not going to prevent them from getting an education. So all it needs is a teacher to say, it's all right, bud, we've got your back. You know, we're not going to talk about Captain Cook as the discoverer of Australia. It might sound superficial, but believe me, it gets spoken about in our community every day of the week. What happens to our kids at school, what they hear, what they get called, what is assumed about their mind. So those kids need to be well prepared so that when they do get 16, 17, 18, that they can step from that secure environment into another secure environment, which is a training module. Is it a TAFE horticultural course? Is it a TAFE young farmers course? Whatever it is, that they feel protected. At the moment, talking to the people who have worked on the farm here for the last 5 or 6 years, people don't feel that love. They don't feel that protection. And so when you feel that you're left out of society, all sorts of emotions take place, especially when you're young, and sometimes it results in negativity. So it's not just about providing a TAFE course, it's providing the kind of socially relevant and supportive education from the day that kid walks through that school gate, so that security gives them equality with the little kid from Baldwin who's equally fascinated by school, equally enthusiastic, but 90% better prepared for what they're about to do. We want our kids to be equal, not in front of, but equal.
Yeah. And
And
Mindy,
that equality, as with all other socially relevant revolutions, sometimes takes affirmative action. And we don't want to be vilified for that because it wasn't our fault anyway.
yeah,
So we need to build those people into our system. We need to encourage them, support them. And as Josh said, we wouldn't, if we got my dream of the representative body, we wouldn't be able to staff the things we need to staff. It would be inevitable that we would be relying on non-Indigenous people of goodwill. Those people are there. They are there, and they need to be supported in front of the rogues, you know, the mad and mendacious who hang around Aboriginal communities hoping to get an easy job. We need to supplant those people with the people who go out of their way and walk across bridges for social reform, are not those people who have 8 mobile phones and 3 bank accounts. So there's going to be an interim period when the dream doesn't erupt overnight. We move toward it, but we've been moving toward it for a long time. The last decade, for instance, I've seen people come into the agricultural industry and the thought bank that goes behind it. Some of them are here, and it's that's very encouraging, and it proves that we can do it. We can do it, but we've got to stay the course. We were talking about forests before. We were talking about plantings. If you don't have a 75-year plan, you're not serious. And it's the same with our education. We have to be planning now for children who will be born in 75 years. We have to be planning now to save a river, which at the moment might look really degraded, but we have to have a plan for that river, 75 years of love and care and good science to repair it. So all of these things are long term, but they're possible. And we cannot afford to have departments like the Department of Agriculture and Department of Education telling us what is possible. We need to be saying to them, we know what's possible. Just make sure that when our child enters school, that you have a plan for them. But they'll have the enthusiasm as long as you have the plan and their future at heart.
Thanks, Bruce. Mindy, do you want to pick up from there? I think how do I say this? I'm a big fan and I follow you a lot on social media, and I get to see all the amazing places that you get to go and the things that you get up to, but also the mob that you bring on the journey with you. And yeah, do you want to touch on that, about the different ways that you see First Nations people coming into the industry, and then what are the meaningful things that help grow and retain them in this space? So like Josh said, they're not leaving for when they hit a certain age, or like what Uncle Bruce said, they're not getting snapped up by a government agency or a bigger outfit. What are you seeing in the space, and what are you up to?
Oh, okay, brother. I appreciate it, Garama. I mean, I'm just echoing a lot of what Uncle Bruce said. I think, a lot of the work I do, I love cooking. I think food brings us together, and we say, like on Bunjalung, when I cook for you, you're my mob. When we eat together, we're family, and I think that's one of those things. We've become so disconnected from food as a society. We've made it an inconvenience, and that's why inconvenience foods are so prevalent within our community. If we can actually get back to cooking together and eating together, and that's when we're actually going to be reconnected. And some of the work I do is I've got a Judge and Schools program. I love being with those young ones. Talk about energy and the enthusiasm and complete lack of bias. These kids, it's not built, we're not born with it. It's built into us. And what we do when we bring our beautiful little jarjums out on country is that we say, country is your teacher, country is your classroom. So we bring them out, and it doesn't matter if they're Indigenous, non-Indigenous, wherever these little muggles come from, we invite them to walk on country with us. And I ask all those beautiful little kids, where were you born? I'm up on Bunjalung. I work with all the local schools. So the kids are putting their hand up. I was born in Byron. I'm born in, Ballina. I said, how exciting, you're Bunjalung. Isn't that deadly? And it doesn't matter, their background or their heritage. They're born on Bunjalung, they're Bunjalung. And I tell them, like our elders say, if your spirit is here, then you belong here. You know what I mean? And I feel like what part of our problem at the moment in this country is our guilt and our shame. People don't know how to connect with country. And kick off your feet and walk on her. We eat from country every day. If you're eating good foods from country, you're connecting with country. So, I think there's this big reteaching and relearning that we have to do as a society. But the kids are just so beautiful because they don't have those built-in biases, those prejudice that we do as adults. We climb the trees, they pick up carpet pythons, we're harvesting gula lungs, our finger limes, we're getting those kids busy. We give them a sense of pride in a shared heritage and culture that belongs to all of us. We're not creating division where black fellas are here and the white fellas are over. We're all together walking on country, and we're creating those and giving those kids those opportunities for those experiences so they have connection, they have that sense of pride. I do a lot of work with other non-for-profit organisations up here. The returning, we have a Dubai bush food program. We're getting our young Aboriginal girls in high school out on country. It is their birthright to be involved, to understand, to know native foods. We've got to remember we've got these intergenerational gaps between what our old people knew and what our people know today, because my nan wasn't allowed to speak her language. My mum never, learnt it because my nan wasn't allowed to speak it. So I'm doing my best to relearn our lingo and to teach it to everyone, not just mob, but to everyone that lives on Bundjalung. We should all be revering those things. I want our young people to step in and to reclaim, their birthright, to know about their native foods, to understand how to read country, and not through a language, not through a listening, but through our observation, the way that our old people did it. There is ancient knowledge trapped in our foods, so I work with a lot of young women, taking them back on country and reintroducing these foods. And I know when I teach them how to identify and how to cook with these foods, they're going back home and cooking a feed up for their mob at home. They're getting their families around that kitchen table again, and they're having a meal together, because that's my big challenge to everyone. When's the last time that you sat around your family dinner table, cooked a feed together and ate it and turned off those devices and shared a yarn? That's our storytelling time. We're the oldest storytelling nation on the planet. We need to reclaim that as a culture. And I think, that reteaching and reclaiming is so important for our young ones, because I want them to be proud. I want them all to be so proud of where they are, where they come from. If they're born on Gadigal, if they're born on Bundjalung, let's teach them this beautiful history that we're all part of, so we can all feel proud walking together. And the children give me great hope. They wear me out. I'm buggered by the end of those days out on country with those little ones. But they learn so much. There's the importance of that connection, the importance of being part of that kinship that we don't own, but we belong. When we teach those young ones these important ancient knowledges that has been handed down to us, we teach that with everyone within our community. How powerful can we all be in terms of creating a positive change? And I think that's the beauty of mob. We're always extending that hand of invitation to say, come and learn and come and walk and have garama, a listening, a respect, a ghana, an understanding deeper than a listening and looking and speaking up. It's that understanding, that feeling, that connection. If everybody had an opportunity to experience that, I feel so gifted that I had that with my elders out on country, or these beautiful beaches of Bundjalung. When I walk, it wasn't like we were going out to learn about culture. It's just a way that we were as a family, as a mob out there, getting the yugaris up from the beach, those beautiful pippies, cracking oysters from the rock walls. I wish our environments were safe enough that we could still do that to this day, getting the freshwater mussels out of those river systems. If everybody had an experience like I did when I was growing up, God would be proud to be Australian. We really would. We'd be so proud of the country we come from, but we don't have those opportunities. So any opportunity that anyone can get to walk on country with mob, that's what it's all about, and we're all here to extend that invitation. My business, Kakala on Country, isn't about cooking a feed for people. It's about connecting them to country and culture through food and sharing all that ancestral wisdom, so we can all feel a sense of pride and connection. And like Uncle said, it's a story that's largely untold. We're not told the true history of our nation. I want everyone to get curious. I want everyone to get excited about it, so we can all celebrate it and we can all protect it for the future, because it's all about bringing that ancient into the modern to protect our future generations. And we need to give our young people that opportunity.
Awesome. I think we're going to head into some question time, but before we do that, I think I just might go around the panel. there's been the chat's been firing. I could see about, different submissions where people joining in online today can go and make a submission to different government bodies and agencies that are considering or have an opportunity for First Nations participation, for change, for innovation. But I just want to open it back up to the panel. Mindy, while I've got you off mute, do you want to maybe what's your one thing or two things that people joining in today, what can they do when they leave this webinar to make some change or action? Might be big, might be small, and any parting words or call to action, something.
Hey, brother, our people always say slowly, slowly, gently, gently. These things take time, but the best thing we can do is from the grassroots, learn those traditional places that you live, work, and play, understand the traditional custodians, go and connect with them, understand your native landscape of your area. The foods that grow in Bundjalung aren't the foods that grow everywhere else on the country. Understand that what's endemic to the place that you live, work, and play. Learn some language, learn what that place was called, what it's still called by those traditional owners today. Learn to say hello, goodbye, and thank you in traditional language, and embrace those languages and those knowledges. Those simple things. Integrate some of those beautiful native endemic species into your backyard, your front yard, and wherever you can grow. Increasing biodiversity each meter at a time can do wonders for our beautiful Jagun, our country. So just be active and being connected with that place that you choose to call home. Yahweh.
Thank you, Mindy. Bruce, you're off mute. I'll put you up next. Some parting words or calls to action for people listening in.
Yeah, I think we talk about reconciliation plans, but Mindy mentioned it before. They usually go into a drawer, and I've got very little faith in paper if it isn't bound in covers. I hate seeing those documents created and then filed. What I prefer to see is ideas lodging in people's brains, and then they act on those ideas straight up. I don't care whether there's a mission statement. I don't care if there's an action plan, but I do care very much about direct action, that we actually, buy from Aboriginal companies, that we volunteer. If we're going to volunteer for the local football club, we also volunteer for the local Aboriginal netball team, and just become part of the Aboriginal community by volunteering, by being a friend. And that is where the change takes place, because so many people come up and say, I don't know what to do. The reason people don't know what to do is because they don't know the Aboriginal community, and they don't know their history. Learn the history of this country, the whole history, and embrace the Aboriginal community, because once embraced, we will embrace you. But we've been waiting a long time for that embrace.
Thank you, Bruce. And Josh.
Yes, thanks, Praz. I think for me that the conversation and what I guess would encourage you to do is learn the agricultural truth based on where you are. And one of the greatest gifts of Uncle Bruce's book is the questioning around the agricultural practices that were conducted on land prior to colonization, and how they were told by the early colonists in their narration of what happened on country. So one of the biggest things I'd encourage you to do is think about some of those early stories, dig into the history, and learn about how agriculture as we know it, kind of in this broader concept today, was developed, and ask if that's the agricultural system that we still need, or whether we need to have this reckoning with what it should look like into the future.
You left it short and sweet.
I can do it sometimes.
No, it's good. It's good. It's look, I just really want to thank the panel. Ahead, we're going to open up to the floor now. So if you've got some questions or even some thought-provocative statements that you'd like to put out, No karaoke song requests. Josh and I haven't warmed up, but yeah, if you want to pop any questions in the chat, please feel free to do so now. I think I just want to touch on reconciliation action plans, because I see them at times as a really powerful tool and a roadmap for people that don't know where to start. Reaching out to your local reconciliation group, reaching out to organizations that are on a reconciliation journey. I think it's a important and can at times be a really useful step, because the framework within a reconciliation action plan, it all starts with relationships, and it asks those mandatory actions in that reflect stage of a reconciliation action plan are around establishing relationships and knowledge of your local Aboriginal community and with the traditional owners in your community. So I think that's something that is really important in a First Nations context in agriculture, but even in the non-Indigenous spaces of agriculture, having relationships with your community, having support to navigate any challenge or shock that may come. At times it's really hard being a farmer and managing, whether it's crops, cattle, whatever it may be. Droughts and wildfires really hit our sector quite deeply, and not knowing that you're not alone, that you have support, that there are people that are on the journey, ahead of the journey, just starting out on the journey, in any context, whether it's First Nations relationships or other. I think it's a really important part of the step. So in wraps, if you are an organisation in the agricultural sector or regenerative agricultural sector looking at reconciliation action plans, really encourage you to reach out to Sustainable Table. We have a really awesome reconciliation action plan that has enabled us to really go out with purpose, to form relationships, to put on things like today. This First Nations panel has been an outcome of our reconciliation action plan. So I really encourage people to think about it, but also to think different too. It might not be a reconciliation action plan and following the RISE framework that's going to be right for your community group, organization, or individual journey. It might be something else. And there's a lot of food for thought by the panel members on where to start, how to get people at different ages and different parts of the journey. So yeah, there's a lot there. I'm looking for some questions. I wonder if, Jess, have you pinned any questions for me?
Yes, I've got one from Amy Carrard. If Amy's here and would like to ask the question directly, she's more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, I can read it out.
Yes, let's hear from Amy.
Hello, everyone. How's that sound?
Perfect. We can hear you loud and clear.
Jessie knows me well, and so she therefore probably knows that I'm at the gym and there's a lot of background noise. Yeah, I mean, I guess a call to action in itself, but really great timing for me to hear what was spoken about today. So there was an inquiry into food security in Australia, and a report produced from that. The Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries has now got a consultation period on a discussion paper. This is a lot of like jargon and stuff, but they put out a paper and they say, now tell us what you think about this. So that's what they're accepting submissions on that at the moment. I have a governance for health equity, food systems academic background, and I look at it and I'm like, if we get anything that is kind of based on what they put out there, it's just going to be dismal and really upsetting and the same and business as usual. So I just really encourage everyone, even if you've not engaged in the submission process before, it can be as simple as writing in some of the things you've heard today or that you hear on other things or read and say, this is the sort of food system that I would like in this continent, and how that will help all people have access, dignified access to the food that they want, whether that be through producing it themselves, like we're talking about agriculture today, but obviously not everyone's going to grow their own food, but that you would love to see, social enterprise models or whatever it may be that are Indigenous owned, and that I would love to be able to use them for catering the work events that I have to organise, but I can't do that because they don't exist at the moment. I'm going on a bit of a ramble now, but also, so the submissions, you can write in a submission. The other part is that they're proposing to form a national food council, and expressions of interest to be on that council close on the 10th of September. So that's only next week. The written part you have until the 24th of September. So I guess just a call to action to say, if you are as worried about what our food future looks like, don't let it only be like Coles and Woolworths and Big Red Meat Australia that apply for these things, because then that's all it will be. We've got this opportunity to show them how diverse this food space is on this continent. I'll stop ranting now.
No, thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate that. And I think we do need a diversity of voices from different parts to form part of that food council. And really appreciate that you're at the gym and that it's something that all of us should strive through. So yeah, I really appreciate the balance of webinar and thought leadership as well as gym today. I think it's great. We should all be taking a leaf from your book. Ahmed, you've got your hand up. Can we move over to you?
Good afternoon from Queensland. My name is Bipu. I'm doing PhD at the University of Queensland, and I'm looking at Australian native food value chain. What are the challenges? What could be done to improve the value chain so that the Indigenous community could be benefited? So, first of all, I must say, today's discussion was a really great discussion. I really enjoyed it. And some of the things I also found in my research that access to land is a big issue when we are trying to develop the value chain. So adding to that, access to land, there are some other issues like capital, bankability, and skills issue. So my question is around here. We need some initiative to improve the situation. In your opinion, from the panel's opinion, who do you think should take the initiative to drive the initiative?
Yeah, I think it's pretty thought-provoking when you talk about land tenure in any context. I think, Josh, Gilbert, I might throw off to you in the first instance. I know that you've done some work around land tenure, and dare say, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, 60% of Australia's land mass is under care and control or have some sort of Aboriginal rights towards that land or interest. Could you provide a bit of info around that and what you're seeing happening in that space? And then maybe we can have a chat about who should be taking the initiative, because I've definitely got an idea on that.
Yeah, happy to. So I think, yeah, your stats right. It was about 60%. I think it's growing to, well, there's at least a closing the gap commitment to increase that by another 15%. So the 75% of Australia's landmass may have Indigenous legal rights or interests. The issue with that and the fraughtness of that statistic is that despite those interests, none, and I mean literally 0% of any revenue that's gained on that land or is actually goes back to mob. So it's a great statistic for agitating for change, but a not so great story, I guess, around what the economic enablement of that land is.
Yeah.
So the kind of baseline for Indigenous agriculture that was done by the CRC of Northern Australia found that basically none of the benefit was going back to any Indigenous groups, which for me is a real shame, and I think should be a real shame for the agricultural sector that's unfairly benefiting from that access to land, and it has been basically inaccessible for a mob to kind of engage and enact with that. I would say, like, the dream really for mob should be, based on the current legal system that we have to play in, is freehold title. Like, just like everyone else, the dream should be having land access that enables us to have the same rights and privileges that any other farmer, or certainly most farmers in Australia, have access to. And the challenges of that, though, is that to buy anywhere with with more than 100 acres in Australia requires you to have at least a 40 or 50% deposit. There was some research done by, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but one of the beef corporations that found that you needed $10 million worth of land assets to be able to have a farm that would be profitable in their sense. And that means that, mob to meet the threshold of that industry given total need about $4 or $5 million to stump up just with the cash alone to be able to buy the farm, let alone all the infrastructure and commodities or whatever they want to farm on top of that, which is just not reasonable, and certainly not reasonable when you've had no intergenerational wealth transfer over the last 200 years, which has happened for basically nearly every white family in Australia. So there's a lot of work to be done in the finance space. We've had 50 years in Australia of trying to provide equal opportunities for housing, and we really haven't done that for land at large, and particularly for agricultural land. And I think for me, that's a new frontier that we need to push into. We need to look at what those opportunities might look like, really rethink about from a funding organization perspective, what that could look like in terms of the big banks. But, I also sit on the board for Indigenous Business Australia. We should be thinking about it too. And we really need to rethink about what that model could look like to actually enable and provide those opportunities for mob, because the current finance system is extremely flawed and really doesn't provide those opportunities.
Thanks, Josh. I might open to Bruce and Mindy, whoever might want to jump in first, around who should lead in this space. So in terms of maybe thinking about who should lead within a local community or within a language group area, I've definitely got strong feelings that if it's, say it's in dark and young country, it should be led by dark and young people, or if it's in Yuin country, it should be led by Yuin traditional owners. So what's your thoughts around who should be leading in different localities and in different spaces? Whoever wants to jump in. Look, they're being polite.
I
Oh,
know.
no,
Go on, Uncle.
Yeah. Rightio. I think it always has to be local community. There are some horror stories of local community having been given land back and then develop it into a housing estate for non-Aboriginal people. That's, we wish that didn't happen, but it does occasionally. But I still think the Aboriginal community is the right repository for those decisions to be made. And as governance training is supplied, and as young people keep coming through with more managerial expertise, I think that will happen less and less. Aboriginal people are the most monitored people financially in the world. So we don't need more monitoring. We don't need more regulation of Aboriginal people. We need better opportunities educationally. And I think that will make an enormous difference. The community that I belong to down here, Jigamy and Twofold would be one of the best organised community organisations I know. Two Aboriginal people running an organisation which provides so much support for the community in health and education, employment and training. And, we don't want to regulate a business like that out of existence just so that we don't get a situation where some corrupt brothers go and sell land to a housing developer. We need to provide the opportunities for those of good cultural heart to succeed. So I think those decisions have to be made by community. And I don't know what Josh G thinks, but all of those large holdings held by lease by people like Gina Reinhardt and co. Their lease runs out eventually. I think we missed the boat about 10 years ago when most of them ran out, their 100-year leases. But we shouldn't allow it to happen again. Those leases should go back to the local Aboriginal community and to be resourced so that the local mob can actually run that as a business. We need to remember that when land is handed back to Aboriginal people, a lot of the time the white owners act like Portuguese when they deliberately smashed the toilets and hand basins in land that they handed back to the Timorese. We can't afford that to happen. It has to be legislated that Aboriginal people inherit the infrastructure as well, because infrastructure on leased land is part of the lease. So that's one way of looking at. But I know communities who have been given land and no resources at all. They're absolutely impoverished because the land tax is enough to cripple them. So it's not just about land, it's about resource, and the training of the young people to actually operate that land. But over to you, Mindy, and thanks for being part of it, Mindy and Josh, because I get an enormous amount of security in having you young mob there.
No way, Uncle. Thanks for leading the way. Yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer for me. I'm with you, Joshy. I think, it needs to be mob-led, mob-designated. We were really great the way that we did it back in the day. Our old people, we used trading routes. We used our song lines. We were sharing resources. We knew how to mitigate issues. If we had, sea urchin down there, Uncle Bruce's country, come down, do a big harvest and share those resources around. There's so many ways that we can tap back into those old ways of thinking and being and, being part of a system rather than trying to control it, which I feel like so much of modern agriculture tries to do. Let's lean into those old ways of shared resources, interconnection. We've got songlines on Bundjalung that go right across to Noongar countries through Central Desert. We have trading routes, we can reconnect those. We can revitalize our songlines through our foods, through agriculture. We can integrate, our beautiful natives and the introduced species that we now have here, but it's about bringing that balance back. When we do that and it's Indigenous led, we know that country is going to be taken care of for future generations. Our waterways are looked after, our Jagon, our country is looked after. I think we just have to really dismantle and reframe everything that we do to understand what agriculture really looks like, break it down and reform it, not be scared of that. I mean, I'm here to break the glass ceiling on all of this stuff. I don't want to fit inside the boxes and these structures that have been keeping all of us, not just mob, but all of us so quiet, so still for so long. It's very intentional. Those government structures, the bureaucracy that's in place, this is ours to reclaim. And as a community, as like-minded people, moving together and reclaiming that is the only way forward. I believe that we can do it.
Awesome. I might just pick up a question from the chat from Rebecca, who Rebecca asked, I'm curious and eager to know what mob would like to see from research in this space. What future Indigenous-led research in relation to food, agriculture and traditional foods should focus on. So I might start with you, Mindy, on this one. What's your number one thing in terms of the research space? We know that our universities and research institutions, there's a lot of investment that goes into our native bush foods, whether it be First Nations governance or even, Joshy Gilbert with your UTS hat on around workforce participation. And what do you think is, Mindy, what do you think is most important for future research?
Look, I'm just going to be really honest with you, mob out there. We, as a community, as a collective, we're really cautious about working with universities at the moment because a lot of our cultural IP has just been taken from us. You know, we're very generous in our knowledge sharing at the moment, you know, from previous experience personally and within our own community. A lot of that information that we've shared for the greater good has been taken from our communities and is then owned by universities. That's not the way that it should go. That information, that cultural knowledge always belongs with community. I pay those respects to my community and I always make sure I ask permissions, but I know the information I share, I've been given permission. We're not to interpret it. We're not to make commercial gains from it. Universities do that. Commercial organizations do that. So we need to find a way of working with mob in a way that's really culturally respectful and doesn't take that cultural knowledge off our communities for commercial benefit. And unfortunately, that's what's happened. So I think we need a new framework to operate within. For any research that has happened, that information remains within the communities and isn't used by universities or other organizations for their commercial benefit. So I think that's where we need to start. We need to reframe the way that we're engaging with mob.
Awesome. Bruce, I might go to you.
Yeah, I just agree with Josh and Mindy and everything they said. That resourcing our mob to be in a position to succeed. But I put a thing on the chat just saying that whatever non-Aboriginal Australia does for Aboriginal people should not be seen as charity, but as increasing productivity. And, you know, some Aboriginal people I know will disagree with this partnership idea. You know, there are some who think that white fellas should just go home. Well, you know, 80% of my family is white. I don't, you know, if they go home, I lose my life. We're going to have to do it together, but non-Aboriginal people have got to realise it's not charity. This is a productivity question about utilising all the people and looking after the land. And we can use the land, but only like asking your mother what she thinks is going to be best to eat today, that you're actually asking for it. And as soon as you ask, it changes your mentality. As soon as you think Mother Earth, it changes the way you think, because you can't walk up to a plant and take wattle seed without first asking that question. Because as soon as you ask the question, in your mind you're going, do I really need this? Is this the right time to take it? I know I can sell it, but is it the best thing to do? As soon as you start thinking in Mother Earth, your whole attitude to land changes.
Thank you, Bruce. And Josh G, I might hand over this to you now, and I think you're going to do a 5-minute wrap up for us at the end. So I'll hand over to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Bros. I think, Rebecca, to your question, and taking my university's hats off, in which I get the pleasure of dealing with many, I think for me there's a real opportunity for us to reclaim the research paradigm, and that's one of the reasons behind proposing an Indigenous Agricultural Research and Development Corporation is that we will have a position for mob to make decisions around that, and that we can make sure that Indigenous knowledge is protected properly, that we are doing the research in a way that not only meets kind of ethical guidelines, but also cultural guidelines, which often research projects don't get balanced against. And it really allows us to narrate what the outcomes are, because one of the big challenges I see across universities is that often when we have research, I mean, the research is often taken, I think, to Mindy's point, and, you know, that's one thing that definitely needs to be held to account, particularly in the agricultural space, but so too does that the story get narrated often by non-Indigenous people who narrate stories to benefit their own self-interest and their own methodologies. And I've kind of come across this recently from another university where the very deniance upon our practices over millennia allows them to have a certain perspective on what their research paradigm should be. And as long as, while over there in the position of power, that that narration will continue to be told by them, and they'll be able to keep selling books and their ideas and their quick fixes without giving us that opportunity to really have that internally for us. So I think where we can actually have a body that kind of embeds, does the research and then kind of contains the information, we're going to keep kind of battling around who gets access to it, and even just down to an extremely granular level, like where do you actually save documents? If you actually have an organization that has something that's all protected that can do all that, then actually you're not having those kind of challenges, which is one of the very real conversations that's happening in universities at the moment of like, you get this restricted information and do you save it on, this Google Drive or this other drive? Like that's the kind of challenges that I see with some of the university work that needs to be reawakened, I guess. Yeah, so there's some work to be done around that. And sorry, just quickly, I think the US provides us with a lot of hope around what this conversation could look like. They had a Indigenous or Native American Indian advocacy body from the 80s that really led these conversations over there. In fact, they sued the government over there for racist agricultural policies, which has given them a fund to be able to invest back into young Native American producers. And that by having that governance body, they've been able to really actively ensure that policy has changed, that research can be done in a culturally appropriate way, and that those conversations at least have to be held account. You actually have to go and be involved with and engage with the IAC over there, and that's certainly, I think, a model that we should be looking at here and really exploring.
Thanks, Josh. I just want to thank the panel for an amazing lunch/afternoon yarn. Look, we've touched on land tenure, we've touched on colonization, we've touched on what does walking together with First Nations people look like, not just purely in working with the 6,500 varieties of bush foods, but also across commodities. We've looked at the need for governance and governance structures and what that looks like and who should be at that table negotiating. But also now we're touching on where research goes. So like, it's been a really big yarn that's had a lot of frontiers. And it's definitely not the end of the conversation. I definitely know you'll see Josh, Bruce, and Mindy talking about these things and actioning, creating things, innovating things to change this space. So just really encourage all of you to like, share, follow, and keep following our awesome panel as they continue to do the work, and then also sharing those conversations around how you might join in or how we might work together to make an impact in your space. So again, thank you, Bruce, Mindy, and Josh. Really want to thank Sustainable Table for bringing us all together and for the opportunity to hold this space in a culturally safe way where everyone is valued, heard, respected. And I think without these safe spaces being held, and without the work of Jess and Christy and the team, this conversation wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have, I think, would we have over 100 people joining us this afternoon? So, if you can go and share this with somebody else, that would be great. So once again, thank you all, and thank you, panel, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, mob.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.